there, friends! I haven't shared a video in a little while. We at Centering Productions are in a short hiatus between seasons of our D&D show, A Matter of Time. Season 1 was absolutely incredible, and I look forward to diving back in with Season 2 in just a few months. I plan on putting out a few videos between now and then, but in the meantime things have been a little crazy for me recently, even without running a D&D session and then editing and posting an episode every single week. I'm nearing the end of my editing process for the sequel of my book, on the subject of witches. I'm working my day job more often, I'm raising a toddler, and I am getting ready for Enchanticon 2026. Last year, Enchanticon was my first convention as an attending author, and I had such a blast. I met some truly incredible and like-minded people, I spent way too much money on dice, I DM'd for a table on their game night, and I gave a lecture on story structure in fantasy. That lecture is what this video is going to be about, and I'll be getting to that shortly. I had a magical time last year at the con, so when I was offered the chance to return as an attending author this year, I did not hesitate. And while I will not be repeating my talk on fantasy story structure, I have been hard at work preparing 2 new programs. This year, Enchanticon attendees can find me sharing my thoughts on the art and technique of long-form storytelling. This lecture will be geared mostly towards dungeon masters looking to run a campaign that may span months or even years, but it will also include vital tips and techniques for writers and anyone who considers themselves a storyteller. Additionally, I will be leading a panel dedicated to discussing magic systems. The full guest list hasn't been released yet, but I can tell you that it will include my A Matter of Time co-stars Alexander Herr and Evan Rose. If you're going to be at the con, I would love to see you in the audience at both of these events. The schedule has not been posted yet, but it should be out soon. Now, I do have to come out and say that the parent company of Enchanticon, Mischief Management, has recently come under fire for some less than acceptable business practices. Most notably, failing to pay some vendors and artists and delivering just unacceptable events, which, of course, are obviously terrible things, and I cannot condone those actions. Because of these reasons, several people that I know, including authors that attended Enchanticon with me last year, people who I trust and respect, have dropped out of this year's event, and I completely understand their doing so. My decision to remain an attending author was based on many factors, but essentially came down to the fact that the people who I met in 2025 who were on the ground running the event were incredible people, whose priority was the safety, success, and enjoyment of everybody involved, from vendors to guests. Despite the recent actions of the parent company, I had nothing but good experiences with the Enchanticon staff, and I trust them with this year's con. That, in addition to the fact that I've already paid my table fees, and it takes place in my home city, meaning I don't have to worry about travel, lodging, or dining expenses. I'm still planning on attending, and I am cautious but optimistic about this summer's event. Now, with all that being said, onto the video. My discussion on story structure in fantasy last year was a very broad, introductory look on how and why we tell stories the way that we do, focusing specifically on the fantasy genre. It was directed towards both writers and dungeon masters, but it was open to anyone who was interested in the subject matter. It was well attended, the audience was very engaging, and had some great follow-up questions and conversations in the final moments of my allotted time, and afterwards several people came to find me at my booth to continue the conversation. Overall, I was very happy with how it turned out. Like I said, I am not reprising that same panel at Enchanticon this year, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't enjoy it. The rest of this video is going to be a condensed version of what I had to say on the matter, including a breakdown of various approaches to story structure, how and why it should be used as a dungeon master, and what elements of fantasy are vital to structure, as well as the reverse. Let's dive in. Like I said, this is a broad and shallow dip into the subject matter. I only had an hour to talk on something that I'm very passionate about and consider myself an expert in. If anything that I say in this video intrigues you, I encourage you to leave a comment below to discuss it more and do your own personal research into the art of storytelling. If this content interests you, check out my channel for similar topics and my own stories, and you can join the Centering Productions Discord for much more. There's a link to the Discord in the video description. Story structure, by definition, is how we tell stories. It's an expansion on what we are all already inherently familiar with. A story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Story structure is the idea of beats and rhythms in narratives, the paths that can and should be followed to make a story exciting and satisfying. I started my lecture with a breakdown of some of the more popular story structures: 3 acts, 7 acts, the hero's journey, and the Harmon story cycle. Because I don't want this video to be an hour long, I'm not going to go into detail about each of these, but if you are unfamiliar with them, you can find all kinds of reviews, theories, discussions, pros, cons, and everything in between about each of them here on YouTube and in the internet beyond. And if you consider yourself a storyteller but don't know these basic structures, well, honestly, you probably do and you just don't realize it, but you need to go and do your research. In short, the 3-act structure is incredibly broad, in a way that it does essentially apply to just about every story out there, but it also makes it not incredibly helpful. 7-act structure has been used without deviation for every single Marvel movie for the past 2 decades. The hero's journey is based on blatantly misogynistic and cherry-picked research, but it results in a solid structure tool and is responsible for one of the greatest stories of all time. And then the Harmon story circle is just an updated and simplified version of the hero's journey. These are, of course, just my opinions, and if you think I'm wrong, you can go ahead and argue with me in the comments and go do your own research. There's one more story structure that I'm going to go through and add to this list, but first I want to go back and take a deeper look at the 7-act structure. I'm going to lay it out in more detail and then show you how I use it as a dungeon master, crafting an adventure, whether it be short or long, epic or episodic. Our first act is the background, which can include the exposition, maybe a prologue, tragic backstory, that sort of thing. Act 2 is the catalyst, where an event forces the character or characters forward. In Act 3, we see what's defined as the moment of importance, in which the story's direction and tone are set. Act 4 is known as the checkpoint, in which something happens that cannot be undone or changed, and is also known as the point of no return. The 5th act is defined by a low point, which can be achieved through any number of scenarios. There's the failure of the protagonist, the success of the antagonist, the loss of a friend or a mentor, the breakup that's sparked by easily avoidable circumstances or lack of communication or something like that. Act 6 is the climax, where lessons learned from the first 5 acts are then used to face the antagonist or the antagonistic force. And finally, Act 7 is the resolution, where our characters must adjust to the world that changed with the checkpoint in Act 4 and everything that has happened since. All in all, the 7-act structure is a comprehensive yet simple way to break down a story to its bones, to best understand it. If you're a writer or a storyteller who is ever struggling to figure out what needs to happen next, take a moment to figure out where in this journey you are. Now let's take this outline here and apply it to a D&D adventure. Pretend you are a dungeon master, crafting the next campaign for your friends, and you don't know where to start, or how to pace the adventure you have in mind, or what your players will find satisfying. This will help you plot out your adventure from beginning to end. Act 1 is the background, otherwise known as the "you meet in a tavern" act. Your characters might not meet in a tavern. Some people are automatically opposed to tried and true tropes, and if that's you, you should check out my video on how to start a D&D campaign. But I digress. No matter how you begin your adventure, you have to start it somehow, somewhere, and you do so with Act 1, in which you bring the characters together and allow them time to bond through small adventures and trials that also engage them with and teach them about the world. Meanwhile, you lay the groundwork and foreshadow what is to come. In Act 2, the catalyst, the small adventures are interrupted by a significant moment in which you make your players aware of larger characters and turnings in the world that are contradictory to their own ideals, morals, or goals. The third act, the moment of importance, is where you introduce your big bad in a grand and fear-inspiring way, revealing their end goal and intentions, but not their machinations. Act 4 is the checkpoint, At this point in the story, something significant must be altered in a way that cannot be undone. My recommendation is to involve one or more characters' backstory into the villain's scheme in a way that it will be forever changed. This can be a character, a place, a significant event, whatever works. Act 5 is the low point. It comes when a failure of the characters or a success of the antagonist strikes at the heart of their emotional attachment. In a little bit, we're going to talk more about the difficulties of intentionally making the characters feel bad when you are playing a fun game with your friends. It can be one of the most difficult jobs of the DM. One of the things that makes it easier is rewards that come with failures, and we'll talk about those as well. For now, let's go over our last 2 acts. In Act 6, we have our climax. That's easy. We use the information we've gained and the friends that we've made along the way to prepare for, move against, and then confront the big bad. And then comes Act 7, the resolution, the end of the adventure. Or is it? The world has changed, but so have the characters. We acknowledge the growth and learning and then transition into an epilogue. Or, if you are serializing your adventure and this is just the first of many arcs, now we return to Act 1, and this new world in Act 7 becomes the background in Act 1. Easy peasy, right? You just mapped out your next campaign. Great work. Alright, at this point we've talked about the 7-act structure in detail, and mentioned the 3-act structure, the hero's journey, the story circle, but I haven't mentioned the most important and beloved and beautiful and perfect story structure guideline, and that is, of course, mine. That is, of course, said in jest, but I am very proud of my own addition to this list. I came up with this plot structure a few years ago when I gave a lecture at a circus conference about how to build a clown act from scratch. But then later I realized that with a few small adjustments, it worked for stories of all kinds. It's a more detailed, elaborated look at the 3-act structure with key elements added to it. I'm going to give a brief overview of the whole thing, and then I will break down each section. We start with the beginning, in which the central character, or characters, are presented with a problem that is relatable and familiar to the audience. In the middle, the character goes through a series of failures in their attempts to solve the problem, during which growth and change are forced on the character. And then, finally, in the end, the problem is solved, which may or may not lead to larger problems. Now, that may seem like a simple beginning, middle, end structure, and that's because it's supposed to be, but the specifics in each section are there for a reason. I did say that in the beginning, the problem that we throw at our central character needs to be relatable to the majority of the audience. Why? Sometimes people want a break from the rat race, the 9-to-5 dystopian reality that we live in. They want to read about magic and good versus evil and sexy werewolves. Or they want to sit at the table with their friends, roll dice to see if they can slay the princess and rescue the dragon. Why would they want to be shown conflicts that they themselves can identify with? Well, I hope I just answered that question. We as storytellers want them to identify with, to empathize with the characters. Empathy and personal affiliation are key enhancements for viewers or participants of the story. An audience that can connect their personal experiences with the central character is an engaged, sympathetic audience. This is a seemingly simple task for dungeon masters and game tables. Your players are actively playing their characters, the empathetic connection has already been established. The trials that they are facing require their active involvement. Establishing connections is harder off the bat for authors. How do you get someone in today's world to connect with someone whose everyday life is filled with swords and sorcery? The Lord of the Rings has some spectacular examples. We see Aragorn struggling to accept his responsibility and role as a leader, feeling like his identity is being pulled in 2 directions. We see Merry and Pippin constantly overcoming people underestimating them, paired alongside their unbreakable friendship. We see Gandalf's frustrations as he feels like he's hurting kittens. Most importantly, we watch Frodo battling an incredible allegory for depression. Even the Hobbit films establish a powerful, empathetic connection to the dwarves' homesickness and desire to reclaim something that was taken from them, And in my opinion, this last example is that it's done so well that it carries the viewer all the way through the trilogy. The goal when establishing a problem for your characters to face shouldn't just be to tell a story, it should be to establish genuine familiarity and empathy with the audience. It doesn't have to be a direct comparison to an everyday ordeal, but it should be built on a foundation of common experience. Your fantastic worlds and the magic that you fill them with can and should be tools to communicate the everyday struggles of humanity on a macro or a micro scale. From here, you can rely on your audience to draw parallels themselves. Part 2 of my simplified story structure states that the central character then goes through a series of failures trying to solve the problem, during which change and growth are forced on the character. And in this section, the difficulty now lies on the Dungeon Master. While an author has complete control over the narrative and the characters, the DM has the challenge of making their friends fail, which is hard by itself, but keep in mind that the Dungeon Master has little to no control over the player characters, their motivations, their actions, their feelings, and you have to consider the third force at work at the table, the dice, which is the embodiment of chaos and randomness. So with both of these actively working against the DM, how do you encourage or even tailor failures at your game? Well, let's start by reconsidering what qualifies as a failure. I would also include trials, foiled plans, one step forward, two steps back, or gathering clues without solving the mystery. While these aren't exactly a failure of a character, they accomplish the same goal to us as storytellers. They do not result in a solution, and they can be used to force growth and change. And the benefit is that these don't have to feel like failures at the table. In each item from this list, while the problem is not solved, something can still be gained. Though the trial proved too much for the party, their perseverance gained them the respect of a powerful new ally. While the big bad foiled their plan, they managed to kidnap his lieutenant and are now one step ahead of his next dastardly deed. By taking a step backwards, they can recover something that they missed or lost the first time, such as a much-needed magic item. And while they still don't know the cult leader's secret identity, the clue that they found absolves them of all remaining suspicion. In each example, the central characters can continue with hope and motivation, which is key to progressing your story. It's important to note that a series of failures is not equal to you have failed. When I specify that growth and change need to be forced on the character, I mean that the challenges should be designed by you, the author or dungeon master, to challenge the character's weaknesses. This is done so incredibly well in The Legend of Korra. In each season of this wonderful show, we see in early episodes that Avatar Korra has a flaw or a weakness that she refuses to confront. Over the course of the episodes that follow, that flaw is then exploited by the narrative or the antagonist until it brings her to a low point, and she is forced to adapt, learn, and grow. By the end of each season, she's evolved as a character and as the Avatar, and it's really, really well done each time. You also have examples in fantasy of characters who refuse to change or can't adapt to the problems that surround them. Ned Stark is a great example, and it serves as another lesson about this section of our story structure. A character that chooses not to adapt must face the consequences. This counts as part of the structure. You can certainly go this route. A tragedy is defined by a character being manipulated and punished by their fatal flaws, and tragedies can certainly exist within fantasy. In the end of our three-part story structure, we want the problem to be solved. This is for the same reason, or you could even say that it's because of the fact that we established an empathetic connection between our characters and the audience in part 1. Now that the audience sees themselves as the character, we want them to feel resolved with our story's conclusion. However, it is possible that the solving of the established problem may lead to even bigger problems, which can allow us to start the cycle anew. For authors, this is where Book 2 comes in. For Dungeon Masters, this could be your next big bad. You can consider any of the following scenarios. Through the actions taken by the heroes to defeat their enemy, an ally feels betrayed or slighted. The fallen enemy's ally now has nothing left to lose. or the destruction and aftermath of the previous battle exposes an unknown threat. So now that we understand story structure and a few different ways to approach it, let's look at two elements that define the fantasy genre: world building and magic, and how they fit into these tools. Both of these elements are often defined by how they're approached by the storyteller, and the terms are similar. There's hard world building and soft world building, there's hard magic systems, and there's soft magic. And I think this is a misconception, and lots of people have outdated beliefs on the approaches. I'm here to tell you that while some audiences might have a preference between one style or another, one is not better and one is not lesser. One is not easier than the other, and both can be achieved in a Dungeons & Dragons game. In both categories, world building or magic systems, I would encourage you not to think of it as a one or the other choice, but as a spectrum. A world building spectrum might look something like this, with Lord of the Rings on one side, a world that has several languages built for it, and intricate histories and family trees, as well as details on actual trees, and so much more, to something more whimsical, like Over the Garden Wall on the other side, and so much in between. You might have a preference, but I would bet that there are stories on both sides that you love. And if your preferences lean more towards the soft world building with an emphasis on whimsy and character growth, might I suggest, on the subject of witches. This is the story of a child raised by a coven of witches who then leaves that home to discover their own magic. It's a queer coming-of-age fantasy story inspired by Avatar: The Last Airbender, the works of Studio Ghibli, The Graveyard Book, classic fairy tales, and so much more. It is available on Amazon and through my website, or you can purchase a signed copy from me in person at Enchanticon this July. All of the sales go towards Centering Productions so that I can continue telling stories and making content for you just like this. Your world building, for whatever style of storytelling that you're doing, whether it's writing, D&D, any other art form, it should support the story structure that you're trying to achieve. And the reverse is also true. The structure of your story should benefit the world building. Each side of the spectrum has some notable qualities to consider to help you with this. The following examples are common practice, but they're not required. Don't feel restricted by them. It's descriptive advice, not prescriptive. If you lean towards the side of hard world building, it's likely that you're going to have an emphasis on the rules of the world as well as its history. There are typically extended exposition periods, like prologues, flashbacks, and history lessons. There's usually an inflated mentor role, and substance is prioritized over style. On the side of soft world building, you're going to have an emphasis on characters and themes. The pace is typically quicker, and you're going to have less central characters, and it will prioritize its style over substance. Remember, one style is not better than the other, and you don't have to choose between the two. Consider one side of the spectrum as defined world building, and the other as implied world building.
There is a third option.
There is?
Yes, it involves murder.
And then there's the secret third option. I call this one transitory world building, where you start on one side of the spectrum and then shift towards the other. I think Attack on Titan does this really well. The show starts by telling you, this is the world, this is how things are, this is what we know to be true. Very hard defined world. But over the course of the narrative, the characters learn how little they actually know. It's a theme of the show. The things that they thought to be facts are actually fiction, or a fraction of the truth. This is a great example of transitory world building. There are poor examples, too. In my opinion, the Harry Potter franchise starts as a very soft, whimsical world, but about midway through there's an aggressive switch to hard world building, which can feel like the rug has been pulled out from the reader, and that the wonder and literal magic that they thought the world was filled with was misplaced and wrong. It can feel like the world betrays and abandons the audience. That's just my opinion on this example, and I know plenty of people who don't agree with me, and that's fine. I'm also not saying that sudden shifts in style can't be done well. I think transitory world building is just as valid as staying on one side of the spectrum. Don't forget what's most important: where your story falls should be supported by your structure. The same is true for your magic system. I'm not going to go too deep into this subject because I'm saving it for this year's con, but nearly everything that I said about world building also applies here. Your magic system is just a subset of your world, after all. You can consider it as hard or soft, defined or implied, indexed or imagined, but remember, it is a spectrum and not a choice between two options. Also, you don't have to match styles. A heavily defined and indexed world doesn't need to have a strictly defined magic system. Just take The Lord of the Rings, for example. And one of my favorite shows of all time, Avatar: The Last Airbender, has a very clear and very hard magic system, but does very little hard world building, outside of like 2 episodes. There you have it, friends, a breakdown of story structure in fantasy. Where to begin, how to apply it, and what sets the genre apart. I hope you learned something, and if you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, share it, and don't forget to subscribe to Center Ring Productions. Come join us on our Discord for more discussions, keep an eye out for Season 2 of A Matter of Time, and come see me at Enchanticon. Thanks for watching, and from one DM to another, have a structured session.